All right, hello everybody. I'm working on your rough drafts, and we'll get them turned back to you as quickly as possible. As I'm sure y'all are aware, semester's starting to wind down. We're kind of getting to the end. We got like 3 weeks of material left, counting this one today. So this week we're going to be discussing leadership. Now, leadership is one of those topics that, it always seems to be at the forefront of every organizational discussion, and probably rightfully so. Every time something happens, there's always some discussion about um, could leadership have done something? Who are the leaders? Should the leaders pay the price for whatever happened? Leadership is ultra important if you're talking about success or failure in organizations. Leadership is key. Leadership is also one of those terms that, when you hear it, everybody thinks you know what it means, or at least at a minimum, you have an opinion about what leadership means, or what you think it is, right? But if you delve into the organizational literature, you're going to find a wide variety of definitions of leadership. One of the issues that complicates the discussion of leadership is that it's often confused with management. And, it is true, managers can exhibit leadership traits, and leaders can uh, show management traits as well, but there are distinct concepts. Leadership and management are not the same thing. So, kind of generally speaking, if we're talking about leadership and trying to define leadership, it's a process where an individual influences a group of people to achieve a common goal. So this may sound like something that managers do, and sometimes managers do. But what separates leadership from managers is that leaders are not really the ones that put policy in the process. Okay, leaders are the ones that provide direction and provide vision and inspire the organizational members. And managers take that vision and direction and make it happen. Right. So managers are kind of your nuts and bolts people. Leaders are kind of the big idea people. Okay, so managers are more like budgeting, personnel decisions, all those things that support the leader's vision. So if you try to find definition of leadership, man, you can find definition after definition after definition after definition. But kind of at the root of all of them is this idea that leaders inspire with vision, and they direct people toward the accomplishment of organizational goals. So with that in mind, let's start talking about some theories of leadership. And my gosh, there are a bunch of them. Right? If you go searching leadership theories, you're going to find theory after theory after theory after theory. And we're gonna discuss some of them, but really, I'm going to talk about theories kind of broadly. The first is trait theory. Now, trait theories were kind of the first run at developing theories of leadership. Essentially, trait theory says that leaders exhibit certain traits. So this type of theory is very much the leaders are born part of that, or leaders made or born, right? Trait theory says they're born, and people either have the necessary traits or you don't. Um, it doesn't allow for any kind of uh, training or leadership development or anything like that. You either got the traits or you don't have the traits. One of the problems with trait theories is nobody ever really identifies which traits are the most important. People just list all these traits that they think people need to have. And some researchers make extensive lists of traits, others make much shorter lists. I've read a study in the past that listed over 30 different traits that authors determined were important for leaders. Over 30 of them. So I challenge you right now to sit down and make a list of 30 or 35 traits about yourself. Don't worry about leadership traits, just 35 traits. That's tough to come up with just 35 general traits about yourself. So Think about how hard it would be to find these 35 or 30 traits in somebody else. And then, think about, well, how much of these traits do you need? Just a little bit of it, or do you need a lot of it? Are all these traits equal? Right? Are some traits more important than others? Trait theory doesn't deal with any of that. And it also doesn't take in any kind of situational factors or behaviors. It's very much just traits. So it was kind of a good start, right? It's just a start to start kind of looking at leadership. So the next kind of theories that showed up were behavioral theories. And these theories emerged because researchers were looking at these trait theories and realizing leaders are more, and what they actually do is more important than just certain traits. If trait theory was true, then everyone who was a super athlete would play some kind of professional sports, right? And that's obviously not the case. Kind of the same way with leadership, right? Just because you have traits doesn't mean that you actually do what those traits should allow you to do. So two of the more important concepts that came out of these behavioral theories is initiating structure and consideration. So they both very much do exactly what they sound like they do. So leaders who initiate structure provide followers with direction for accomplishing tasks by providing, wait for it, structure. So these types of behaviors are leaders who are focused on the task and not really focused on the workers, right? They're just focused on goal accomplishment and getting tasks done. So if you talk about the consideration, those that utilize consideration pay a lot more attention to the needs of their followers. And they're really focused on trying to build camaraderie, trust, all those types of things between leaders and followers. They want relationships between leaders and followers. Initiating structure doesn't worry about relationships. They just worry about getting tasks done. So if you think about these, like on the end of a spectrum, okay, obviously those are two distinct types of behaviors. But when we talk about these things, we always talk about them at the extremes, like initiating structure is this and consideration is that. Well, it's very rare that anybody is only this or only that, right? Most people have a combination of the two because everyone realizes that you have to care about your workers at least to a degree and have some kind of relationship with them. And everyone also realizes that you also have to have some kind of structure to tasks, right? You can't just have no structure to tasks and only worry about how people are feeling about stuff, right? So you have to get somewhere in the middle here. And so the core behavioral theories rest with those two concepts. All right, so after behavioral theories kind of dominated leadership thinking for, 25 years or so, the conclusion that everybody kind of came to was that there really isn't one best way to lead. Okay, so effective leadership was probably more situational than really just some kind of universal trait list or certain behaviors. So the next round kind of led into these contingency theories. So as you could probably guess already, right? If you're starting to talk about theories that depend on things, there's often little agreement on what those things are. So we're going to discuss three of the more widely recognized contingency theories, and they all are somewhat related, somewhat similar concepts, but they are a little bit different. So we're going to talk about Fiedler's contingency theory, situational leadership theory, and path goal theory. So first, Fiedler's contingency theory. So at its core, Fiedler's contingency theory says that the most effective leadership style depends or is contingent on the situation. So Fiedler's theory has two styles of leadership: task-oriented leadership and relationship-oriented leadership. Now, what does that sound like? Okay, it sounds like initiating structure and consideration, and it's very, very close or very similar to that. So he determined that the most effective leadership style is contingent on three factors: personal relationships between leaders and followers. So is the leader trusted, accepted, and liked? Structure of the task. Was the task clear? Were there alternatives? Can the leader demonstrate completion of the task. Was there one correct solution? Are there a few correct solutions? And then leader's position power. Does the leader have a legitimate authority to be asking someone to do something? So, but of those three, position power is probably the least important of them. So if those conditions lead to very favorable or very unfavorable type situations, then it seems the task-oriented style would work best. Where if you had situations that are more the middle of the road, that generally worked better with a relationship-oriented style. So contingent on those things, which type of leadership style fit the best. So then after that, situational leadership theory developed. And situational leadership theory states the best style of leadership depends on the readiness and willingness of followers to handle the task at hand. So this theory also included task and relationship dimensions. But this theory included 4 distinct leadership type behaviors: telling, selling, participating, and delegating. And if you go in your book, there's a chart on page 439 that explains when each leadership behavior works best. So this is a pretty simple type of leadership theory. So the final contingency theory we're going to talk about is path-goal theory. And path-goal theory also came out about this same time as Fiedler and situational leadership theory. So this theory is interesting because it draws heavily from the expectancy theory of motivation, which I'm sure you all are still very familiar with from when we covered motivation a couple weeks ago. But in a nutshell, path-goal theory says the leader must satisfy the motivational needs of the followers, and then they accomplish this through the adoption of one of 4 leadership styles: directive, supportive, participative, or achievement-oriented styles. So if you think about this again, kind of in this whole framework of what we've been talking about, you can probably see where directive and supportive resemble what? Initiating, structure, and consideration. So the crux of this theory is that leaders must adapt their style to what's most appropriate to the task and the characteristics of the followers. Path-goal theory is more complex than the other two, and it really hasn't been applied to any big degree or studied extensively. So this was all kind of in the late 60s, early 70s that these contingency theories started coming around. So then in about the 1980s, this new concept showed up, and it was transformational leadership. So transformational leadership simply says that it inspires followers to move beyond their own self-interest to think about things in broader issues. So it's accomplished by creating a singular purpose for the leader, the organization, and the followers. So there's 2 kinds of leadership involved in here: transactional leadership and transformational leadership. And if you think about it, you can think about it on kind of a continuum: transactional on one end, transformational on the other end. Transactional leadership is essentially that leader-follower relations and task accomplishment is totally based on an exchange relationship between the leader and followers. Leader says, if you do this stuff for me, I will do this for you. You'll get these rewards. This will happen, right? It's very much of, I need you to do this, and I'll give you this if you do it. So in the short term, that would work well, right? I mean, it's easy to get somebody to do something if you offer them something of value. But in the long term, there really is no relationship building here. It's just a series of transactions. So you really don't end up with any kind of relationship between the leader and the follower. So there's really nothing binding them together other than this kind of mutually beneficial relationship where the leader gets things done and the followers get things because the leader gets things done. So in transformation leadership, like I said, is more about just inspiring followers to move beyond their self-interest. So it's all more about the singular purpose. There's no transaction really going on. It's just about motivating people to do for the greater good kind of thing. So if you think about that on a continuum, obviously you can't go on just creating exchange relationships nonstop. And after time, people are going to get tired of just this rah, rah, rah kind of, go for the greater good and work for something bigger than yourself. There's going to have to be some reward and some stuff going on with some transactional things. So, like just about everything else, kind of a combination of these two is probably the best approach, right? So, because of a situation where followers don't have any loyalty to a leader, that's not ideal. And leaders that never really reward anybody or don't anything like that, that's not really ideal either. Um, so that's kind of the broad kind of discussion of leadership. Now, there's a lot of other stuff that we could go into, but I've already gone probably too long at this point. So, kind of in closing, the two readings at the end of the chapter are both very, very good. Joe Schaefer is very, very well known in the policing world, and Jacobs, also very well known. So, please spend some time reading those, and then think about the issues presented in the chapter while you're reading them. And then be sure to do your discussion board, and I'll see you next week.